Yahweh, Yahweh, healer, restorer, caretaker of my soul. Ah, my Lord. Hello friends, my name is Janet Abayo. Welcome to my YouTube channel where trauma meets theology for transforming healthy individuals and families. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. Today, we'll be learning ways of helping children who are struggling with traumatic aftermath of a bad foster care experience. And you know what, like yesterday in preparation for this interview, actually yesterday and today in preparation for this particular conversation, which will be interview based, so very non-formal or informal, I looked at an article written by Caitlin Pabovic, and the article is titled Trauma and Children in Foster Care, a Comprehensive Overview. It was published by Concordia St. Paul on July 10th, 2022. So it's very new and very rich. I found the article to be very, very rich. And in this article, Papovic worked with Monique Mitchell and Joanna Grayson, and of course other scholars. And all of these scholars that I just mentioned are both these scholars that I just mentioned are trauma researchers in the areas of mental health, trauma care, and also foster care in general. Together with these conversation partners, Pabovic suggests, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but pardon me, Pabovic, if you are watching this, I'm selling your work. I'm selling your article because I think you did a great job in it. So yeah, again, Pabovic suggests child abuse and maltreatment are grouped into 4 types, including physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. Which for her, she believes that, or for this individual believes in this article that all of this abuse that I just mentioned are leading to removal from the biological home. So such adverse experiences are usually multidimensional, long-lasting, and are linked with an assorted range of severe and complex consequences across prominent fields of functioning. The transition into foster care is an extensive life conversion accompanied by loss, trauma, and grief. In many child welfare cases, siblings are separated from one another, causing significant emotional trauma. The child is placed into a stranger's home and is expected to be grateful to be relieved from the abuse and or neglect that was endured prior. And to further shed light on this topic, Shreya Ramachandran is joining the conversation today. Shreya is a senior at Moody Institute in Illinois, Chicago, where she studies applied linguistics. She hopes to pursue further studies in theology at the intersection of post-colonial studies or studies on Asian diaspora. Isn't that great? Come on, Shreya. Come on. I love that. I can't wait to see how your journey continues to evolve. And she and I actually met in Nigeria during my 2022 summer break. And Shreya came for an internship with the Bible Translation and Language Development organization that I serve with. And immediately, I remember during our first conversation, Shreya, I remember how we connected on topics of theology and anthropology, family crisis, trauma, and foster care. Shreya was in foster care herself, actually, and she has had years of lived experiences on the typology of trauma that comes with family crisis, foster care, and post-foster care transitions. She has presented on this topic in so many conferences by helping organizations and equipping parents of children who are or have gone through the foster care system to find practical ways in supporting their children. Shreya is co-founder of the Shreya and Yanan's podcast. Their podcast is focused on building faith, culture, and creating safe spaces and loving communities through empathy, charity, and storytelling. How powerful. Shreya, it's good to have you with us.
It's good to be here, Janet. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Well, as a way to launch into our conversation today about the trauma of foster care, and how that reflects to trauma, emotional trauma, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Shreya, which you already mentioned, and I was born in India, and I moved to the United States when I was 2 years old. And I didn't grow up a Christian. I grew up in Hinduism. And around when I was 8 years old, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer. And 2 years later, he passed away. And that led to a series of events that eventually led to my sister and I being placed into foster care. And we were thankfully eventually adopted by a loving family, and got to know the Lord, got to know Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. And yeah, I've been a part of the church for 10 years and have just had opportunities to grow, and ended up at Moody Bible Institute, where I'm studying linguistics and hope to enter into ministry after I graduate, maybe after some further studies in theology. But yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Wow, yeah, such a beautiful story. And actually, that leads us to the next question. So I'm interested in knowing the story that relates to your trauma care history, if you will. So again, like, what is your foster care story, and how does it relate to the field of trauma? And if you could give us a little background of how you even found yourself in the foster care system in the first place, I think we will really be enriched by that testimony.
Of course. Yes. So as I mentioned, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer. But really, my trauma story begins before that too, because I grew up in a South Asian immigrant home, and in South Asian culture, I would say that domestic abuse is very prevalent and very normative, and it's not talked about enough. And so I would say that in my home growing up, domestic abuse was normalized and accepted and just part of our culture. And really, culture is a beautiful thing that God made.
Yes.
But I think every culture has its flaws and
That's right.
ways that it can grow and be challenged to be more loving. And I would say that's one of the things that South Asian culture can work on, is to recognize and to call out domestic abuse. And so I would say that my parents had a very unhealthy relationship with each other, and that overflow of unhealthiness and trauma in their own lives, and their relationship with their own parents and family really impacted the way that they parented us. And it almost felt as if they were children parenting children.
Is that like an intergenerational trauma? Would you say that they parented you, or they were doing their parenting from a spillover of an intergenerational trauma?
Yes, I definitely would say that it was inherited and learned, in the sense that there wasn't healthy conflict resolution. There's a lot of passivity, which is normal in South Asian culture, but to the point where it led to abusive situations. And I would say it was very toxic. And part of that might have been because they didn't know the Lord, and so there wasn't a redemptive element present with the Holy Spirit. But also, it was a very cultural dynamic. So,
Wow. And so that led into you finally, seen yourself in a foster care home.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Can you
Yes.
can you inform us a little about that?
Yeah, so after my dad passed away, there was this man who was best friends with my father when he was still alive. And there was sort of this agreement that this man would make sure that my mom and my sister and I were taken care of. And as immigrant women in a foreign country, and especially in a shame and honor culture like South Asian culture, where it's not really honorable to be a widow with children all by yourself, you can kind of imagine the elements of fear and isolation that my mom faced. But at the same time, the decisions that she made were not for my sister and I's well-being or our safety. She involved herself with this other Indian man who had a wife and kids of his own, but there was a sexual relationship there, and that also impacted my sister and I, and it led to abuse, and my mom really neglecting to stand up for us and advocate for us and create a safe environment for us. And we really were in danger that whole time, and we were, the man sexually abused my sister and I, and so that only added to the trauma of the loss of my father,
Right.
Which I didn't even really mention, but I watched my father really suffer for 2 years.
Wow.
Because he was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer.
Yeah.
And so throughout that time, he had 3 surgeries. He was always in and out of the hospital. He would be going to the emergency room in the middle of the night after having a seizure. And again, like, just adding to the nuance and complexity, we were immigrants. We were far away from the land that we knew.
Yeah.
And the family that we had. And so...
And how old were you at the time?
It was between the ages of 8 to 10.
Oh my goodness.
And so I didn't really have a normal childhood. It was when my father was healthy, he was abusive. And then when he was sick, I watched this like strong father figure. And if you think of like a male dominant patriarchal society like South Asian culture, to see my father, who's supposed to be this like really strong man, the head of the household, completely deteriorate and become so weak and frail. My mother had to tend to every single one of his needs.
Wow.
And eventually he was on hospice.
Oh
and
my goodness.
He passed away in our own home. But it was not peaceful those 2 years.
Yeah.
And my mom experienced a lot of pain and suffering. And my sister and I, we would even take care of my dad when my mom was at work because we had so many hospital bills. And my mom had to become the man of the household. She had to become the provider, which is so anti-cultural. So you can imagine all the different components that really spiraled into a bad situation.
Yes.
Financial issues, cultural elements, isolation. It all led to like the worst of the worst neglect and abuse for my sister and I, or at least the worst that I've experienced. We were always nourished physically, we were always fed, we were always taken care of, but I experienced a lot of pain in those years.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing this part of your family story with us. Thank you for being vulnerable with us. Thank you for sharing this story with us. I can't imagine what your 80-year-old mind and heart had to go through. Because from your story, I heard multiple forms of abuse, multiple forms of traumas. It's like from emotional neglect to maybe even mental torture, and then later on to physical abuse by this man who was supposed to vindicate you from your suffering, who was supposed to protect you, who was supposed to be like a second chance daddy to both you and your sister. But yeah, who also ended up becoming the monster, right? Wow, I'm very, very sorry for that. And but yeah, thank you so much for sharing this story with us. And I'm glad that you are continuing to thrive in this area of advocacy for children whose lives are in danger, especially in family crisis. But also, I am wondering what your advice will be for parents who need to prepare their children for foster care, or whose children are currently in foster care system. Like, what should parents learn? What should parents know as it relates to the trauma care system, but also how they should meet their children's needs, especially?
Yeah. I would say that to kind of pick up on the story that I left off on.
Yes.
So my sister and I were in the height of our abuse situation, and one day I called the police, and they came and they took us away, and we were placed into foster care.
You called the police.
Yes.
I love that justice mood. Did you hear how she did the calling? And I love the fact that at 11, you were able to recognize that something is wrong. And I also appreciate the fact that you stood up for yourself. You stood up for your sister by calling the police. And I'm glad the police responded.
Yes.
So what happened after that?
Yeah. So after that, we were placed into foster care, and we lived with one family for about 7 months. And that was somewhat of a short-term placement, but it wasn't permanent. It was a long-term placement, but it wasn't permanent. And we were waiting to see whether or not it was a possibility that we would have reunification with our mother, with our biological mother. And
so you were hoping to reconnect with your mother.
I don't know if that I was hoping.
Okay.
Tell me
more about that. Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of pain there, and a lot of betrayal, because she allowed those things to happen to us.
And did not protect you both from the person who was supposed to take care of you but ended up abusing you.
Yes. Okay. So I experienced a lot of internal conflict during those years, because I loved my mother. She raised me.
Yeah.
But she also betrayed me and put me in an unsafe situation.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really want to live with her again. I didn't want to be unsafe anymore.
The parent to child trust was basically broken.
Yes. But there would be days where I would miss her, and that's okay. And I look back and I wish I could tell my younger self, like, you're allowed to feel all of those feelings.
Yeah.
You're allowed to feel anguish and betrayal, but also you're allowed to miss that person that at one point loved you very well. And it's not all black and white.
That's right. That's right. And I believe that's why people say that grieving is not linear. Like, it's not a straightforward thing, right? Like, sometimes you experience the ups, other times you experience the downs, and it's okay to feel the negative emotions. It's okay to feel fear. It's okay to feel discouraged. It's also okay to rejoice. It's also okay to hope when you experience positive emotions. So in case you're grieving out there, whatever type of loss you might be grieving, I just want you to hear Shreya's story and remember again that it is okay to experience both the negative and positive emotions at the same time as you navigate the journey of grieving. Hopefully, they will get to a point where you only continuously experience the positive emotions. But until you get to that point, it's okay to navigate the path of mixture of emotions. So yeah, so what happened after that?
Yes. So after that, my mom moved back to India. And so there was really no chance of reunification. And so we started looking for a more permanent home. My sister was almost 16, and I was 13 years old at this point. And we found a family, a Christian family.
Wow.
And our first foster family was also a Christian family.
Okay.
But this new family, they were willing to have us permanently, but at the same time, it was holding with open hands, because the situation with my mom, it wasn't completely stable. And so this family was willing to be flexible and trust the Lord. And they eventually adopted us just a couple years later.
Wow.
And yeah, they are my forever family. I've been with them for 10 years, and I'm an adult now, but they're still the home that I go back to. So
I love that. I love that. They're still the home. I'm an adult now, but they are still the home that I go back to. And I just feel like to encourage someone out there, and maybe you can also chime in here, Shreya, especially if you are a family or if you are a couple who is currently experiencing a conflict in your mind about whether to welcome someone into your home, welcome a child into your home as a foster kid or not, this might be your confirmation. This might be your encouragement that you might be the saving grace of another Shreya. Look at her, a beautiful, young, educated, people-loving and God-loving human being. And so you never know if God will use that as a way to transform both you and the child you might be welcoming into your home. And so Shreya, this leads me to our next question, and that is, what does it take for a family to be ready to welcome a foster kid into their home? Does a family need to be perfect? Like, what does it take for people who might be wondering if they are ready or not, or if they will ever be ready or not?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you're never going to be perfect. Your family is never going to be perfect. But I do feel like adoption and foster care is a calling. And we need people to do that.
Yes.
But if we take on this idea that we ourselves need to be perfect before we can adopt, or we have it all together so that we can rescue this child, we can save this child, well, that's not really the work of Christ. Because when Jesus entered into his earthly ministry, it was incarnational. So he took on the human flesh.
Yes.
And the human flesh is made of the dirt.
That's right.
And so Jesus was willing.
He's very fallible.
Yes, and Jesus was willing to be weak. Jesus was willing to get his hands dirty. And so adoption and foster care ministry is the same, where if you're the parent, you're entering into the child's trauma with them, and you're willing to walk alongside them every step of the way. You're not rescuing them, because Jesus didn't rescue us and take us away. He came down and he lived among us. And so that is a perfect model for adoption and foster care ministry, for parents to be incarnational and to enter in to their child's lives.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing this beautiful insight about parents becoming incarnational, parents becoming Jesus-like, in order to journey with the children, in order to also, take up their cross along the way, as they also model for the children what it means to take up their cross in a world of trauma, in a world of pain, in a world of parental betrayal, in a world of sexual abuse and emotional neglect, and so on and so forth. And so this actually leads us to the next question. And my next question is, what other practical ways can parents learn in helping their foster kids navigate transitions?
Yes. Well, I would say that parents can educate themselves before doing foster care or adoption ministry. And there are a plethora of resources and conferences out there, and books and podcasts and articles on these topics. I would say that a few key points to recognize is to evaluate and understand your own family culture before even entering into adoption, so that you can just be aware. And then understand the culture and the identity markers of that child and where they're coming from. So that child isn't an individual that has been isolated their whole lives that comes into your home, but they have a story. They have a history. They have, yes, of course, they have the individual trauma they have experienced, but they are carrying with them generational trauma.
That's right.
Cultural trauma.
That's right.
And some of that culture and identity is actually really beautiful. And parents can help and learn to celebrate alongside that child where they come from. But it's also important to just recognize that the trauma that they bear isn't just the individual trauma that they have endured, but also like communal trauma, generational trauma.
Wow, that sounds very powerful. And I guess it's okay to also encourage parents to remember that they cannot do this on their own, right? Like, they are not expected to journey this road of trauma or trauma healing on their own, right? Like, and again, I believe that was one of the reasons why you mentioned resources such as books, podcasts. I'm also wondering about counseling, you know, like emotional therapy and so on and so forth. Like, what was the role of counseling in your transition?
Yeah, I am very thankful for counseling in my life. When I first went into foster care, I was in counseling, and that was part of the foster care system's provisions for me and my sister, which was so beneficial because I could hardly even function relationally with my adoptive family in certain ways without counseling. I really needed that to cope during those years, during those formative years of my life. But I would say counseling never hurts. And it is not a replacement for Jesus in your life, but really it comes alongside and only helps you grow and process, because it's always good to be aware of yourself. And I think counseling helps you do that. I don't know about you, but I'm a verbal processor. I'm loving this interview because I'm processing as I'm talking.
That's great.
But counseling really does that for me. And since I've entered into college, I've had to start counseling again because a lot of my trauma
resurfaced in a way,
or a lot of my trauma
like re-triggered in a way.
Yeah, it resurfaced. It was triggered. Now that I'm an adult, I'm just processing it differently. And so I really needed to enroll in counseling again to just be able to navigate these things as an independent adult, because I don't have my parents to depend on anymore. I have to learn how to function by myself. And so counseling really helps me process the things that I went through early in my childhood and during my adolescence now as an adult. And so it's been very beneficial, crucial at times. yeah, I cannot say more how much I am pro counseling.
Yeah, right. And you know, friends, that's why I am an advocate for communal healing. And what I mean by that is that it takes a community for healing to happen. It takes you, it takes God, and it takes your community of healthcare workers or contributors for healing to happen. And in the case of Shreya, of course, her adopted family was very instrumental to that. But also, her therapist were also very instrumental to that, as well as other resources. So yeah, just remember this in case you're a parent out there who is currently struggling the journey of navigating what it means to be a foster parent. I just want to release you from the pressure of feeling or having to feel like you have to do it independently. But we cannot do that on our own abilities. We need Jesus to teach us what it means to journey with children who we believe were called to foster, you know, to be parents over and with, right? But we also need a community of healthcare workers. Yeah, so it takes a community, right? Like that's what I'm hearing from you. It takes a community for this to happen. And so, what are some of the practical things you learned from counseling as you were navigating your early stages of transitioning into a place of health in your trauma story?
Yeah. So I would say that my counselor really helped me to verbalize the mixed emotions that I was feeling, and the way that my trauma created a whole new worldview, because it really shattered my way of perceiving things. And so one story that my counselor always told me, it's like this metaphor for like, okay, on the street there's all these blue trucks, and the blue trucks keep driving by, and if there's just one red truck, and I kind of hyper focus on that one red truck, and then I don't even notice anything else. And so this metaphor really helped me to realize that when there was like a bad incident that maybe re-triggered my trauma, that I wasn't even able to recognize that it was triggering me. Everything else would be negative. And I became really pessimistic about life because I hyper-focused on the one negative incident. And I wasn't able to step back and be thankful for the ways that God has blessed me and has provided for me and all the good things that have happened. And then also I feel like I have the vocabulary to articulate some deep-rooted fears. I know that I struggle with the fear of abandonment because essentially I've lost both my biological parents.
Right.
And so what that does to a child is develop like a fear of abandonment.
That's right.
Even if my dad didn't try to leave me like he did. Yeah. And my mom betrayed me. And so there's this fear of abandonment that plays out.
And she's currently not with you.
Yeah. And so that relationship is broken. It's fractured. And so now every time I make a new relationship, a friendship, coworker, I don't know, even romantic relationships, there's always this fear of abandonment that creeps in and works its way in. And I have to, I don't know, I have to kind of massage that out and be like, okay, what's wrong? What am I feeling here? It's not that individual person's fault. It's actually the burdens that I'm carrying that I'm projecting onto that person. And I need to go to God with that and let Him be my counselor, my healer, and really work that out, because God has never left me. He's never abandoned me. And so some of those fears are, I can take, to the feet of the cross, or I can take those fears to the foot of the cross and lay them down.
Yeah.
And Jesus meets me there.
Yeah.
And I love the Gospels for that very reason, because honestly, if a trauma healing person like yourself looked at the Gospels, you probably see like, oh, this person had trauma, this person had trauma, this lady had 7 husbands, and Jesus knew, and like that, a whole lot of trauma. And
yet he met them. He met each person in their place of pain.
Yes,
right?
And he saw them, and he touched them, and he wept with them, and he sat with them.
Yeah.
And really, I think when you're talking about communal healing, to be the hands and feet of Jesus, we need to learn how to sit with people.
That's right.
In their trauma.
And to see people, and to listen to people, and to touch people, and to hear people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love in action, people. Love in action. Love in action. Yeah.
Truly.
Love heals. Love heals. And this is what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah.
Wow, such a beautiful testimony. I feel like we can like trust God to have a part 2 of this conversation with you.
Yeah.
But for this particular episode, I'm wondering, and I know I did not tell you this, but yeah, I'm wondering, like, in 2 to 3 sentences, what is your nugget of hope? I want you to share a nugget of hope to our viewers today, like in 2 to 3 sentences. And I think you've started talking on that, about, especially when you touched on the cross and how Jesus meets us there. But yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what is your nugget of hope in like 2 to 3 sentences?
I would say that my nugget of hope is to realize that trauma is a journey, and that Jesus is willing to walk alongside you at every step of the way. Something that I wanted to admit, actually, is that I am far from feeling as if I am healed. I actually struggle all the time. I have broken and messed up relationships that I really don't even know how to reconcile. Like I think about it and I'm like, yep, I don't have any answers.
Right.
For things that happened to me like 10 years ago. And sometimes I really wrestle with God, like, God, why did you let that happen? And the beautiful thing is I can cry out to God and say, God, why did you take away my father?
Right.
Why did you spark this catalyst of events that led to so much pain in my life? And he is willing to hear me cry out to him because he wants to hear me cry.
And God is not afraid of your tears, people. He's not scared of your pain. And so he welcomes your laughter. He also welcomes your lament.
Yeah. And your anger and your outrage, because God is a God of justice.
Amen.
And he did not want those things to happen to me.
No.
He did not inflict pain on me.
No.
And he wants to restore and redeem my life, and he already has. But as long as I'm on this earth, I'm going to carry those burdens. And I think my nugget of hope is to realize that, like, I'm never going to be done healing. And that actually sounds like the opposite of hope, but it kind of gives me freedom. Because then I'm not, like, striving for this point where I am perfect.
Right.
So it actually releases my tension, and that's like where I give it to Jesus, because he was perfect for me.
Wow.
And so I'm never going to be perfect.
Yeah.
But the ministry of healing, the ministry of Christ, is my comfort.
Yes.
So that's my hope. Not perfection, not a finish line to your trauma healing, but rather that you have a relationship with Christ waiting for you that is comfort and care, and that involves the church. It involves the community of believers around you.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing this wisdom with us. I believe this has blessed a lot of people watching, listening. And thank you so much, people, for watching this episode. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. Also, remember to share this episode with people. You never know who you will be encouraging by sharing this particular episode and other episodes, of course. But yeah, before we go, Shreya, I'm wondering how could or how can people find you on social media? Are you on Instagram? And I know I mentioned your podcast earlier, but yeah, if you could just mention ways that people can connect with you online, I think that will be beautiful.
Yeah, so you can connect with me on Instagram at shreya.faith. So that's my handle.
Okay.
And then my podcast it has an Instagram account, so at Shreya _and_underscore Yanins _podcast.
Yes, and I'm going to share the link with you in the description below. So yeah,
Yes.
feel free to
And our
please go and
podcast-
follow.
Our podcast is on all major streaming platforms. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Yeah.
There you go, people. So if you want to follow her journey, if you want to invite her to speak in your organization or in your community or in your church about foster care and the trauma that can come with that, or about family crisis and the joy and the healing that can come with that, I hope you can reach out to her. And yeah, again, thank you so much for joining me on this wonderful, sensitive, vulnerable, yet rewarding conversation. And I look forward to coming your way again. See you next time. I love you. God loves you more. See you next time. Bye. Rafa, my love.